The international terminal of Chicago O'Hare hummed with the controlled chaos of a Friday evening, thousands of travelers streaming through the gleaming corridors, rolling suitcases clicking against polished floors, departure announcements echoing overhead. The modern architecture of glass and steel reflected the amber glow of city lights beyond the windows, creating an almost ethereal backdrop for the human drama unfolding within. Margaret Holloway sat on a bench near gate C-17, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing a cream-colored blazer and black slacks. At 72, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd learned long ago how to navigate a world that wasn't built for her. Her hands rested in her lap, patient, waiting. She'd been waiting for 20 minutes. Around her, travelers bustled past without a second glance. Gate agents made announcements she couldn't hear. A family argued loudly about seating arrangements. A businessman paced while shouting into his phone. And Margaret sat in her own private silence, watching lips move without sound, seeing emotion without hearing its expression. She was supposed to meet her son here. Christopher had texted as she'd felt the vibration as saying he was running late from his office downtown, a conference call that couldn't wait, some crisis that demanded his immediate attention. She understood. Christopher was CEO of Holloway Technologies, a company his father had founded and Christopher had transformed into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. His time was valuable, his attention constantly demanded. What she didn't understand was why it had become so hard to reach him, even for something as simple as a flight to Boston for his Aunt Helen's 80th birthday. A young woman in a red dress nearly collided with Margaret's outstretched legs, so focused on her phone that she didn't see the older woman until the last second. She jumped back with a startled expression, then hurried on without apology. Margaret tucked her legs closer to the bench, making herself smaller, less of an obstacle. This was what her life had become, a series of small retreats, constant accommodations to a world that moved too fast and too loud for someone who lived in silence. She'd been deaf since birth, the result of a genetic condition that had also affected her father. She'd learned to read lips, to communicate, to build a full life despite the constant challenges. She'd married William Holloway, a kind engineer who learned sign language to court her. She'd raised Christopher, teaching him to sign before he could speak, creating a home where silence wasn't absence but simply another way of being. But William had died 5 years ago, and Christopher had grown distant, buried in work and obligations, his signing rusty from disuse. Margaret found herself increasingly alone, increasingly invisible in a world that seemed to have forgotten she existed. A gate agent was making an announcement and Margaret could see her lips moving, see other passengers reacting, but couldn't understand what was being said. She watched carefully, trying to piece together meaning from context. People weren't moving toward the gate, so it probably wasn't boarding yet. Someone looked annoyed, so perhaps a delay. Margaret considered approaching the gate agent to ask, but experience had taught her how that usually went. The exaggerated lip movements that made speech harder to read, not easier. The raised voice that changed the shape of words. The impatience when understanding didn't come quickly. The eventual awkwardness as the agent gave up and just waved her away. So she stayed on her bench and waited, hoping Christopher would arrive soon to translate this world for her. That's when he appeared. A man in his late 30s, wearing a navy blue shirt and black pants, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He had kind eyes and a gentle way of moving that suggested thoughtfulness rather than hurry. A few steps behind him, a young girl of about 9, with braided hair and a backpack covered in space-themed patches, was telling him something with her hands, a quick, fluid movements that Margaret recognized immediately. American Sign Language. The man was responding in kind, his signs clear and practiced, making his daughter laugh at something he'd said. They were having an entire conversation in Margaret's language, moving through the busy terminal like they carried their own quiet bubble with them. Margaret found herself staring, not meaning to be rude, but simply amazed. She so rarely saw sign language in public spaces, especially used with such fluency and natural grace. The man and his daughter had almost passed her bench when the girl suddenly stopped and tugged on her father's sleeve. She pointed at Margaret and signed something quickly. The man looked at Margaret, then back at his daughter, seeming to have a brief debate with her through rapid signs. Then he approached Margaret with a warm smile and signed, Hello, my name is David. My daughter Maya noticed you sitting here and thought you might be waiting for someone. Are you alright? Do you need any help? Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, and not from sadness, but from the sheer unexpected joy of being seen, of being addressed in her own language by a stranger who didn't know her at all. She signed back, "I'm Margaret. I'm waiting for my son. He's late." "I'm fine, but thank you so much for asking. It's been a long time since someone signed to me in public." Maya stepped forward, her young face bright with interest. "You're deaf too, like our mom was?" "Maya," David signed with gentle reproach. "Remember what we talked about? It's okay to ask, but give people space to answer if they want to." "It's alright," Margaret signed. "Yes, I'm deaf. I have been since birth." "Your mother was deaf?" David's expression grew tender. "She was. She died 2 years ago from a heart condition, but she taught both of us to sign from the time Maya was born. It was her first language, and ours too." "She must have been wonderful," Margaret signed. "She was." Maya signed enthusiastically. "She was a teacher at a deaf school. She taught other kids like her. Dad says she made the world better." Margaret felt something crack open in her chest, a loneliness she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Here was this child, this beautiful child, who'd grown up in 2 worlds just like Christopher had. But unlike Christopher, Maya still moved freely between them, still saw sign language as something natural and valuable rather than something she'd outgrown. "Can we sit with you?" David signed. "Our flight to Seattle doesn't board for another hour, and Maya's ready. You look like you could use some company." Margaret nodded, grateful beyond words. They sat together on the bench, and for the first time in longer than Margaret could remember, she had a real conversation, not the halting, frustrating exchanges with hearing people who grew impatient when she couldn't read their lips quickly enough, not the lonely silence of being surrounded by people but unable to connect, but actual, flowing conversation in her native language. David told her about his work as a middle school science teacher, about raising Maya alone since his wife's death. Maya showed Margaret photos on her tablet of the deaf school where her mother had taught, where Maya now volunteered, helping younger kids with homework. "Don't you ever feel?" Margaret hesitated, not sure how to phrase her question. "Don't you ever feel like the hearing world doesn't see you? Or in your case, Davida, don't you feel like people judge you for using sign language?" David considered this thoughtfully. "Sometimes, yes, people stare. They make assumptions. But my wife taught me something important. Our language isn't less than spoken English, it's different. It's visual and expressive and beautiful. The problem isn't sign language. The problem is people who think there's only one right way to communicate." "My son used to sign," Margaret found herself admitting. "When he was young, we were so close, but as he got older, especially after his father died, he stopped. He says he's too busy. When we're together, he talks on his phone or texts while we're supposed to be spending time together. I try to read his lips, but he doesn't face me, doesn't make it easy. I feel like I'm losing him to a world I can't access." Maya looked indignant. "That's not very nice. Doesn't he know it makes you lonely?" "I think he's forgotten," Margaret signed sadly. "Or maybe he never understood. He grew up hearing a sign language was just something he did for me, not something that was truly his. Now that his father is gone, there's no one to remind him. Then he needs reminding." David signed with quiet conviction. "You shouldn't have to be invisible, Margaret. You deserve better than that." They continued talking, and Margaret found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone in years. Her frustration with the world that saw her deafness as a deficit rather than a difference, her grief over losing not just her husband but also the son who seemed to have forgotten her, her fear of becoming irrelevant in her own child's life. David and Maya listened with the kind of attention that comes from truly understanding. They didn't offer empty platitudes or try to minimize her pain. They simply acknowledged it, validated it, shared their own experiences of navigating between deaf and hearing worlds. "My wife used to say," David signed, "that deaf people aren't disabled, that they're just people who experience the world differently. The disability comes from a society that refuses to accommodate that difference." She fought her whole life to make the world more accessible, more aware, more inclusive. She sounds like she was an amazing advocate, Margaret signed. She was. But you know what? She also said that the best advocacy isn't always grand gestures or policy changes. Sometimes it's just refusing to be invisible. It's being present, being seen, demanding that the world acknowledge your existence and your value. Before Margaret could respond, a man in an expensive suit rushed up to their bench, slightly out of breath, his phone still in his hand. "Mom, there you are. I've been looking everywhere." Christopher Holloway stopped abruptly when he saw his mother sitting with two strangers, all three of them signing to each other. Margaret looked up at her son, and David and Maya looked up too, immediately understanding the situation. "Christopher," Margaret signed, then remembered he might not catch everything and added the words aloud in her measured, careful voice. "These are my new friends, David and Maya." Christopher's expression was complex: relief at finding his mother, embarrassment at being late, and something else, shame, perhaps, as he watched his mother communicate so easily with strangers in a language he'd let himself forget. "Hi," Christopher said awkwardly, then remembered himself and signed a rusty hello. "I'm Christopher, Margaret's son." "We know," David signed, standing and extending his hand to shake. "She's been telling us about you." Christopher looked at his mother uncertainly. "I'm sorry I'm late, Mom." The conference call ran over, and then traffic. David interrupted gently, signing and speaking simultaneously so Margaret could follow both. "Your mother was saying that you two used to be close, that you used to sign together all the time." Christopher looked at his mother, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in months. "I did. I mean, I do. I got busy." "Too busy to speak your mother's language?" Maya signed with the blunt honesty of a child who didn't understand why anyone would choose this connection. "Maya," David signed a gentle warning, but Christopher was already shrinking under the weight of the question. "No, she's right," Christopher signed, his movements slow and unpracticed but still readable. "I've been a terrible son. I stopped making time. I stopped making effort. I let work become more important than the person who raised me." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. She signed, "I thought you'd forgotten me. I thought you didn't want to be connected to this world anymore, to my world." Christopher knelt in front of his mother's bench, taking her hands in his. He signed, slowly but clearly, "I could never forget you. But I think I forgot how important it was to show up in ways that matter to you, not just in ways that are convenient for me. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Over the next hour, as they waited for their flight to board, something remarkable happened. Christopher didn't check his phone once. He sat with his mother and practiced his signing, learning from David how to make his movements clearer, more expressive. He watched Maya communicate with effortless fluency and remembered when he'd once been that comfortable in both worlds. "Can I ask you something?" Christopher signed to David. "How do you do it? Balance everything: raising a daughter alone, keeping your wife's language alive, teaching full-time?" David smiled. "I remember what matters. Work is important, providing for Maya is important, but being present with her, really present, in ways she can connect with it, that's non-negotiable. My wife taught me that. She said that the worst thing about being deaf wasn't the silence, it was the isolation, the feeling that the people who mattered most couldn't be bothered to meet her in her world." He looked at Margaret. "Your mother spent your entire childhood learning to navigate a hearing world for your sake. The least you can do is maintain the language she taught you, so you can meet her in hers." Christopher nodded, tears in his own eyes now. "You're right. I've made everything about my world, my convenience, my schedule." That stops today. When their flight was called for boarding, Christopher helped his mother with her carry-on bag, but this time, he did something different. Instead of just guiding her through the process, he turned to face her before each step, signing to explain what was happening, what announcements were being made, what the gate agent was saying. Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years, included, not accommodated out of obligation, but genuinely included in the moment. As they prepared to part ways, David and Maya heading to their gate for Seattle, Margaret hugged them both. "Thank you," she signed. "You gave me my son back." "We just reminded him of what he already knew," David signed. "But I'm glad we could help." "And Margaret, don't let yourself be invisible. You matter. Your language matters. Your experiences matter. Don't ever forget that." Maya hugged Margaret tightly and signed, My mom would have really liked you. You remind me of her, strong and kind and not afraid to take up space in the world." On this flight to Boston, Christopher sat beside his mother and they signed to each other for the entire journey. They talked about William, about memories from Christopher's childhood, about Margaret's fears and Christopher's regrets. They talked about the company of Christopher catching his mother up on developments she'd missed because he'd stopped making time to share them. "I want to do something," Christopher signed. "I want Holloway Technologies to become a leader in accessibility technology, specifically for the deaf and hard of hearing community. We have the resources, the expertise. There's no excuse for not doing more." Margaret's eyes widened. Really, and I want you to be part of it. Consulting, advising, whatever you're comfortable with. You're my connection to a community I've been neglecting. Help me do better." Over the following months, Christopher transformed not just his company but his life. Holloway Technologies launched an accessibility initiative, developing apps and devices designed specifically to help deaf and hard of hearing people navigate a hearing world. They hired deaf consultants, partnered with deaf advocacy groups, and made accessibility a core value rather than an afterthought. But more importantly, Christopher transformed his relationship with his mother. He made Sunday dinners sacred and no phones, no work talk, just sign language and conversation. He took refresher courses in ASL to improve his fluency. He invited Margaret to company events and made sure interpreters were always available. 1 year after that meeting at O'Hare, Christopher stood at a technology conference, addressing an audience of thousands. And beside him, interpreting his words into American Sign Language, was his mother. "My mother taught me to sign before I learned to speak," Christopher said, pausing to watch Margaret's hands form his words. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot that language is about more than communication. It's about connection. It's about showing the people we love that their world matters, that we're willing to meet them where they are." He turned to face his mother directly, signing as he spoke. "A year ago, a stranger at an airport reminded me of what I'd lost. Davida, if you're watching these, thank you. You and Maya gave me back something I'd thrown away without realizing its value. You taught me that being busy isn't an excuse for being absent, and that the people who love us deserve more than our leftover time and attention." The conference hall erupted in applause, but Christopher only cared about one person's response. Margaret was crying, smiling, and signing. "I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of you too, Mom," Christopher signed back. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that your silence isn't absentia, it's just a different way of being present, a way that's just as valuable, just as valid, as any other." Years later, when people asked Christopher about the turning point for Holloway Technologies' commitment to accessibility, he always told them the same story, about an airport, a chance encounter, and a single father who'd refused to let his wife's language die with her. About a little girl who saw someone lonely and decided to do something about it. About the moment he realized that the person he'd been ignoring was the one who deserved his attention most. "My mother lived in a silent world," Christopher would say, "but it was never empty. She was never less than whole. I was the one who'd become deaf to her needs, deaf to her loneliness, deaf to the simple gift she'd given me, a second language, a window into a different way of experiencing life." He'd pause, then add, "Sometimes the people who need us most are the ones right in front of us. Sometimes the way to show love isn't by trying to bring them into our world, but by having the humility and grace to step into theirs." And Margaret, watching her son speak these truths, would remember a lonely bench in a busy airport, a kind stranger and his daughter who'd chosen to see her, and the way one act of kindness could ripple outward, transforming not just one family but an entire company's mission. Because David had been right, deaf people weren't disabled. They were simply people who experienced the world differently, and the greatest gift anyone could give them wasn't pity or accommodation. It was the gift Margaret had received that day at the airport, the gift she hoped everyone could experience at least once in their life, the gift of being seen, not looked at, not tolerated, not accommodated, but truly, fully seen and valued exactly as they were, in their own language, in their own world, in the beautiful, expressive silence that was never really silent at all. It was just a different kind of sound, one that spoke directly to the heart.